All right, guys, we're gonna take this 4-pound ball, we're gonna turn it into a cylinder, and then we're gonna make it into what we call here in New Jersey at Mud Clay Studio, a sexy pot. So why is it called sexy pot? It's probably completely not HR correct. I don't know, people don't know if it's a vase or a vase, so we figured that a lot of people come in different shapes and sizes, and so do pots. Sometimes you got one with a big butt, sometimes you got a little, sexy, sort of straightforward thing. So we call it a sexy pot. But I noticed a lot of people are asking about how to shape your clay. So I figured I'd kind of work on that. I think the biggest mistake that people make when they are shaping their clay is they think that it's a really extreme shape. So they kind of forget to subtly shape it into the vase or the vase or the sexy pot. From this point on, we're just going to call it a sexy pot. So what they'll do is they'll sort of make a quick right turn, meaning they'll be shaping their cylinder and they'll go like this, whoop, whoop. And the problem with that, whoop, whoop, is that the centripetal force is also pulling it out. What it actually is, it's a super gradual curve. There really is just one little part, right? That arc, that arc. I don't know. I don't remember high school geometry. That really causes the curve. Otherwise, it really is a bunch of straight lines. So some people just go a little too extreme when they're starting to shape it. The other thing is I tend to believe that a sexy pot or a vase is really a cylinder. It's a cylinder that has some curves to it. So that's what I'm kind of going to do here. So this mound of clay is going to dictate how wide the bottom of our cylinder is. Now, there's an aesthetic part of this. I did go to college for this, so I got critiqued and talked about the law of thirds and stuff. We don't want our pot to look like just kind of Humpty Dumpty sitting somewhere. If that's your desire to have it weighted onto the table visually, then you're going to start with something super wide and you're going to have it that way. But we really want our pots to sort of lift off the table. We want you to see the bottom curve. So we want to start out a lot more narrow than one would think that you would. We're going to talk about that as we go. So here we go. We're all centered here. Going in and open up. I'm not a fan of putting feet on my sexy pots unless I'm doing something really like sort of roundish. And then I would have start with like a bowl. So because I want the bottom of my sexy pot to be about 4 inches wide, I'm just going to open it up 4 inches. I'm not going to open up the whole width because then I'm going to have a hard time sort of bringing it back in. Now the key part about sexy pots or vases that have shape is collaring or choking. I prefer collaring. I don't know, something liberal about me that says choking is not appropriate. So right now my clay thinks it's going to end up like this, but it's not. It's going to end up narrow at one point. So I'm going to do this sort of claw collar. I'm going to lock my hands in here. The heel of my hand with my body is going to push in. The heel of my hand here is going to also coerce the clay in. And I'm going to scoop in, but I'm not using my fingertips because I don't want to thin out the lip. So I'm pushing in with my left palm, and now my right palm is just sort of coercing the clay in. So that's sort of what I call sort of the full hand collar. So it's still about 4 inches wide on the bottom, but I've told the clay that it's going to end up narrow up on the top. Now I'm going to start to pull. Now, when you start to pull, I want you to say to yourself, I really need a volcano. I really need a cone or a volcano because that's what my house is missing. So what that means is I'm going to have both of my hands aiming this way, not just one hand. When we do just one hand and your inside hand is going straight up, you're going to end up with a super thin lip, and we want to avoid that. So I'm going to get under here, wheel going a little slower, and now I'm just going to speed it up, and both hands are aiming towards the middle above my clay. So a little bit of clay came off. It just meant I was being a little too aggressive. I'm gonna get down here again. I really should have wet my hands between pulls. Someone at home is going, why didn't you wet her hands? I don't know, I'm distracted by talking. Start to go up. I want everyone to notice, I don't do this. Okay, if you do this, your top of your body now becomes a separate tool, and it's more likely to get stuck on the clay. But if you bend at the elbows like this, like a T-Rex or CeeLo, or or anybody who has short arms, you're gonna have more control by leaning one elbow, if not both, on your body. And then your body remembers the stability, so when you can't reach your leg, your arms have learned the stability. So notice that I'm going in. That's telling the clay it's gonna have a narrow neck. Get down here again, I'm gonna pull up again. So remember, a sexy pot is a cylinder with some curves. So I care mostly about pulling up a cylinder first. Now, we don't want, depending on how sexy we want her, we don't want to make our walls too thin. So if this gets too thin and we stretch it all the way out here, it is going to break and it's not going to be able to handle the weight of her neck. So we want to make sure we leave enough clay here to allow the amount of stretching that we want to do. On the converse, your top is going to get narrower. So it's okay for that to get thinner, because when we collar, that's going to get double thick. Notice the minute I can get my hand out to touch the other hand, I drop my thumb over. It's raining here in Jersey. So my students may be a little late. Gives me a little more time. All right, so now we've got ourselves this sort of thin cylinder. Oh, someone just came in. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to stretch her. But first I want to collar in the neck, so I'm going to go ahead and wet my hands. Collaring is a fast, wet, aggressive thing. Thumbs, this part of your knuckle, and fingers all the way down. Wheel going fast, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure, lots of pressure. You're going to get nervous because it's going to look wonky on top, but that's okay. It's just clay. So now I'm going to insinuate how sexy she is. So I'm going to start to push a little bit more on my inside hand. My outside hand is supporting it. I'm going to start to stretch. Now I'm going to put more pressure on my outside hand and sort of work on this cylinder up here. Compress my lip. So now I have a favorite tool, and that favorite tool is this simple steel rib. And what I like about it is that I only use part of this edge, the curved edge. So what that's going to do is it's going to sort of give me a wall as I start to stretch out. The same way I use my sponge when I'm making a bowl. So I'm going to go down on the bottom here. I'm going to put the tool where I want it. I'm going to push the clay up against that tool, and I'm going to stretch her out. What the metal tool does also, it tends to take off any sort of yuckies. And then I'll go back to using my fingers to sort of stretch this up to go straight up and less pressure on my thumb. Now, if I want to make my neck a little narrower, I can start to collar, but I'm always going to start at the bottom, but I'm not going to do anything until I get to the top. Again, super wet, fast wheel, nothing, 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 aggressive, 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 and come off. There's somebody in the studio, so now I'm all awkward. Hope you don't notice. All right, so I'm gonna get in here again. I'm gonna start to stretch her out a little bit more. And now I'm gonna work on the bottom. So I didn't stretch out the bottom a lot in the beginning because that's sort of my support. And I don't want everything I'm doing to the top to cause that bottom to buckle out. You're going to notice I switched to my finger when I got up to the top. When I'm fitting out something that I collared, I tend to do what I call a micro pull, which is literally my two fingers kind of pushing into it. I'm going sort of just this sort of classic kind of, I don't know, Greek, Roman, Japanese, whatever was functional in ancient clay times, just to kind of show you the sections as well. So we really don't want to aim for this to be in the middle. We don't want this bulbous area to be straight in the middle. That's that whole law of thirds and the golden ratio and all that stuff that eventually I'd love to start doing a bunch of videos about. Aesthetics are super important. But for now, we just want to get the skill down. All right, guys. So at this point, I'm going to do what we do here. I'm going to call it a pot. And I want to get the wood tool. Don't forget to get the water out of the inside. And just like a cylinder, I'm just going to get off as much as I can. Now, how I trim this is important depending on what my lip looks like. So if your lip goes straight up and down, you're definitely going to need a chuck, because you're not going to have any ability to hold onto it with anything. But because I have this little bit of this ledgy lip thing here, I hate chucks. I also really don't love trimming. So if I have the ability to not, I don't. So I'm going to get off as much as I can down here so that maybe I don't have to. I don't hate trimming. If I don't have to, I'd rather not. You know, I really just like throwing. I don't really care about the end result, so that's a whole nother video. So I'm gonna go in here and get the water out of the inside. If you have a sponge and a stick, that's lovely. If not, you'll see I leave these little lines here. I'm a fan of little glazed directional lines. That's a whole nother video too, I guess. All right, guys, there she is. Feel free to name her on the bottom and subscribe and tell me what other videos you want to see. Thanks.